Welcome back to Handy Andy and building a Virginia steam engine, part 1, continuation, and finishing the frames. Let's get going on this. In this episode we'll be working on the front bumper, the bolster, and the rear support. Here are some raw materials I ordered from McMaster Car, and the list of all the parts that were ordered will be at the end of the video. Here's some angle iron I had laying around, which I then soaked in hydrochloric acid to remove the mill scale. Here you can see how clean it looks after being soaked in the hydrochloric acid. Here I put the frames in the hydrochloric acid and used some earplugs to plug the holes. This ended up not working, so I don't recommend doing it. Here are the angle iron supports for the front bumper, and you can see the holes that have been drilled in them to help guide where I need to drill the holes to mount them to the frames. I ended up having to redo these parts close to 3 times. I ended up going with the bottom parts that look a little bit shabby, but actually work out, and after painting you won't see those lines. Here you can see the frames lined up with the front bumper and the rear support piece that I'll be machining in this set of videos. What you're looking at here is a 1/2 inch plate steel that I drilled 2 1/4 inch holes to set up for a jig to bend the front bumper. Here you can see the pegs I used for the jig. Here I'm trying to bend it, but the metal's already cooled down, so it's not working so well. And you can see the little backstop I set up with the other clamp. Here you can see me heating up the end and getting ready to bend it around the jig. I'm using a spanner to help me bend it around the corner, and then one of my ball peen hammers to help turn the corner. What I'm doing here is rearranging the clamp so I have more leverage to pull around the steel dowel basically. Here I set up a little hearth using some fire bricks I had laying around. This really helped heat up the part and let me bend it around the part. I was able then to reapply it back into the hearth and heat it back up to do the other side. Here you can see the parts look pretty good. I've trimmed off one end, and here the other end I have to trim it flush. Here you can see what the work looked like in this photo. I was able to bend it around the pins. I did get some deformation, which is known when bending metal, and I got it around both ends pretty nicely. I was pretty happy with the final dimensions, which were needed to be exactly 6.5 inches, which they were. So I think they came out just perfect. After heating them up, I do get some mill scale. So again, I dunk these parts in hydrochloric acid. After washing them off and then brushing them down, I hit them with a little bit of sandpaper. You'll notice a little notch where I hit it with the bandsaw. I'll fill that in with JB Weld later. Here's the back piece that I then trimmed up also and faced off on the 4-jaw chuck on the lathe. Here are the 2 pieces, all cleaned up and ready to be marked up for the next process. Here you can see I added some blue dicum so I can figure out where I need to be able to place the holes I need for the mounting brackets and also the tail hook or the hook that goes in the back for the tinder. All I did was I used some of the 1/4 inch plate from the frames to then lay out the part. I drilled the hole, and then I cut off all the edges with the bandsaw, and then shaped the rest with the file. You can see here it came out very nice. I then dry mounted it on the rear support, and then I was able then to super glue it in place, tap and drill it, or drill and tap it into place. Came out very nice. Here I'm doing a dry fit, I then super glued it to the frames and did a transfer drill through the holes. Here in the next picture, you can see how I did that. I just used the drill bit that made the hole to make a little divot. With that, I used my tool vise to hold it in place and I drilled out the holes. You can see the drill bit has a marking for the depth. While tapping, unfortunately I broke a single tap in one of the holes. The next series of photos shows you how I extracted them. It was quite ingenious. I took 3 sewing pins, put them in the flutes, and then twisted. This twisting action allowed it to release the tap. Here you can see me dry fitting the front bumper. I just used a simple adjusting clamp and figured out the alignment, and then with that I was able then to super glue the L brackets to the bumper so then I could transfer the markings. I used slot head screws to mount the bumper to the L bracket. LBSC recommended rivets, which I bypassed. Here you can see that I put the screws on a nut, which I could then mount on a drill and then use my 1-inch sander to round on the edges. Here in the next series of photos is the process I did to make the bolster. Here's the piece of material that I would cut down to create the bolster. I then created a center line and found the center point of that center line and punched a hole. This was then to be drilled out per the diagram for the hole for the bolster. Next, I went and turned it around and made some guide holes on the sides. Here was going to be the 6 holes that would then attach it to the frame. These holes were drilled out using appropriate sized bits for the flathead screws that I had. That was 440 in my case. Here you see the clearance holes nicely drilled out. Next I went and created a nice transfer so the flathead screws could sit flush on the back of the bolster. Next I mounted it up on the frames, as such, and super glued them in place. Using the same drill bit to make the hole, I spotted each of the holes. This would make it easier to then drill the holes into the frame. With that said, I then test mounted them in place. Here in the next photo, you can see closely some of the markings I make to know with the left and right side, using 1 dot or 2. In the next set of videos, I'm making the horn stays for the axle boxes. I use my bandsaw to cut them up, and then my 1-inch belt sander to clean up the ends before I cut off the next one. I use a square to make sure I get a clean line, and go through and make the front 2 and the back 2 horns. I have to be honest, I have to make the rear ones over again. Here I'm spot drilling them before I go and I do the clearance hole, which I believe is a number 32. This process went pretty quick. I won't bore you with all the other ones. There you can see me countersinking and then repeating it on the other side, drilling out the hole and then again countersinking. I had to do this 4 times and actually 6 times by the end of this video. I took the horn stays, I super glued them with the blue tape method, and then here you can see me using the clearance drill bit that I had to just make a little divot to know where I need to drill the holes for the screws that are going to hold the horn stays into the frame. Here's a good preview of what that looks like. I then use a tapping size drill bit for a 440 and pretty much pre-drill all the holes. From this distance you can't see, but the drill bit does have a little black line for the depth I need to have. This was pretty easy to do and was easy work to do for all the holes. You can see me use some 3-in-1 oil to make sure the drill bit is nice and lubricated as I drilled all the holes out. This was very important over the whole project. Here you can see the tapped hole size that I made in all the different axle box locations. 2 of these will actually come to haunt me later on in the project. Here I start working on making the axle boxes. What I'm doing here is cutting a slot a 1/4 inch wide by, I think a 1/16 or a little bit more than that deep across one side of this bearings bronze. This was the most expensive part in the whole process to date. After finishing this cut pass, I clean up and then flip the part over and come across in the other direction. With this process done, this finishes this piece to create the axle boxes for the locomotive. This section of the video has been sped up by quite a bit, I believe more than 8x, as this part was quite lengthy and truthfully quite boring. Here, after cleaning up, I do a quick test fit on the frame. As you notice, it's a little tight, but I can come back and file those openings. After the cleanup, and you can see the marking numbers to know where they are located, I glued the pairs together. I then did a quick center drill on the pairs of axle boxes. These pairs are the front pair and the rear pair axle boxes. After that, I mounted up a bit from Harbor Freight that caused me a bit of problems. Number one here, guys, I should have bolted down the vice grips because this part took me for a ride. I left it a little loose so I can actually get the bit to center itself. And then right here, towards the end, well, it gets a little gory, guys, I'm sorry. Yep, watch it flip around on me. And yes, I did get hurt. You can see the part hit the camera stand, and the aftermath after I applied some second skin. After this, I went and bought the appropriate drill bit from McMaster Car and drilled out the holes. I then separated the pieces, put some blue Dicom, and then proceeded to make the oiling holes for the axles of the main drive wheels. This part came out very nice after all that grief I had with the bad drill bit. Here is the fully assembled frame. Basically everything in part 1 of LBSC's plans in the first installment finished. You can see the markings for the matching of the axle boxes to their location in the frame, the horn stays mounted to where they belong, the bolster mounted in its location, and the front bumper and angle brackets installed and mounted. This all looks good. I'm really happy with it, and let's proceed with part 2. Before we do that, here's a still photo of the same frame I finished. You can see it looks very nice. And lastly, here's the parts list that I had to buy of materials to do this part. I will continue this throughout the project. Thanks again for watching Handy Andy, and see you in the next episode.